Joining us, staff writer at The New Yorker, Susan Glasser, policy editor at The Bulwark, and host of The Bulwark's Mona Charen Show. Mona Charen, and former FBI general counsel and MSNL legal analyst Andrew Weissman. Susan, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So Ted Cruz might have a bias toward action. But when you are doing whatever you want and disregarding rules and laws, you're going to get yourself caught up.
Yeah, I mean, that's the story of Trump 2.0, is essentially throwing up as many possible disruptive, even radical proposals, ordering the government to do things it's never attempted to do before, and basically kind of seeing what sticks and what comes out of it. I have to say that clip is a remarkable clip. First of all, Ted Cruz is not exactly oozing sincerity there, it seems to me. Secondly, and importantly, Katie, you notice he doesn't enumerate what these so-called conservative victories are. And I think that's because it's not at all clear which, if any, of these conservative victories, and they're not really conservative as much as radical victories, are going to stand. And this goes to your point about the legal fights, and especially the Justice Department being in the crosshairs of all of it. We're going to see whether Republican senators, including Ted Cruz, really have the appetite to go ahead and confirm Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Todd Blanche, in July. He's supposed to have his hearing to be the new attorney general. It would be a remarkable thing, I think, if they were to go ahead, in part because of that Epstein mess that you alluded to.
A federal judge has now put the Trump administration on the clock. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche has been ordered to give the court a full explanation by July 2nd on why the government still has not released all of the Epstein files. And according to the argument being raised, this is not just a delay. This could be a direct violation of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. But the judge is not only asking one question. He is not simply asking why have the files not been released. He is also asking why certain parts of those files remain redacted. Because under the law, if the government decides to black out information, those redactions are supposed to be explained to Congress. And according to the lawsuit, that explanation did not happen. So now the administration has two choices.
Republicans had wanted the Epstein files released as part of what they ran on, but and Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan write about this in their new book. Donald Trump was the only one around who was really wanting to walk it back or to slow it down, didn't want to hear about it, according to their reporting, got noticeably agitated whenever it was brought to him. So what was the Blanche role in this? Was it to release these files and do the bidding of the people who demanded it and of the law? Or was it to help the president?
Yeah, no, quite the opposite, Katie. I mean, to me, I read that account, and I think it squares with what we've observed, which is that people like Blanche or other Trump appointees, Trump gets mad at them or they feel weak in their positions. And that was the case, I think, for both Todd Blanche and his now former boss, Pam Bondi. And what they do in response is they try to then offer even more demonstrations of fealty to Donald Trump. They escalate in some way. They do some over-the-top thing that Trump has previously demanded of them that they've resisted before. And I think that's the story here about Blanche that's interesting, is that he and Bondi tried to hold off demands to a certain extent that they say are inappropriate, whether it's on the Epstein files or other cases where Trump was demanding that they prosecute various of his political enemies.
They can either explain themselves to the court, line by line, reason by reason, and justify why these materials remain hidden, or they can release the full, unredacted files and make the court file disappear. That is what makes this moment so explosive. This case comes from a lawsuit brought by investigative journalist Katie Fang, and it centers on a much bigger question. What exactly is being kept from the public, and why?
Yeah, you know what, DOJ, that redaction there, which, by the way, I'm pointing to Ghislaine Maxwell's email address being redacted, which you and I both know never should have been redacted.
Right.
But there is a recipient who was redacted. should not be redacted either. But the special master could say, DOJ, you are wrong. That redaction of her email address should never have been redacted. Turn it over to Ms. Fang. Or they could say, Ms. Fang, sorry, it does meet under the law, the requirements of what should have been redacted. Ms. Fang, you're wrong. But, it's this weird chicken and the egg thing, right? It's like if you don't know if it's been properly redacted because you're never told, because they never did the redaction log, which is another part of my preliminary injunction, they never filed the redaction log that they were supposed to do. So
one of the most controversial redactions reportedly involves an allegation connected to Donald Trump and a person who was a minor at the time. Trump has denied wrongdoing, and allegations are not the same thing as proven facts. But the issue before the court is not simply whether Trump denies it. The issue is whether the government has the legal right to keep hiding material that Congress and the public were told would be made transparent. That is where this story becomes bigger than one name, one accusation, or one political party. Because if the Epstein Files Transparency Act mean anything, then the government cannot just selectively decide what the public gets to see. It cannot promise transparency, then bury the most sensitive parts behind black ink. It cannot demand public trust while refusing to explain what it is hiding. And according to the commentary around this case, the allegation in question was serious enough that the person involved spoke with the FBI multiple times in 2019. That does not automatically prove every claim, but it does raise a very obvious question. If investigators took that account seriously enough to document it, why should the public be told to simply move on without seeing what is actually in the records? That is the problem.
A federal judge has just put the U.S. Department of Justice on the spot over one of the most explosive Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein-related controversies yet. The judge isn't accusing Trump of wrongdoing. Instead, he's demanding to know why the DOJ is still withholding FBI interview records involving a woman who accused Trump of sexually assaulting her when she was just 13 years old. Now, unless the government can justify keeping those records secret, it may have to hand them over.
For years, the Epstein files have been surrounded by secrecy, suspicion, political spin, and public frustration. Every time the government withholds information, every time names are redacted without explanation, every time officials say trust us without showing the documents, it only creates more doubt. And now, a federal judge is demanding answers, not rumors, not talking points, not press room spin. Answer.
From U.S. District Judge Emmett Sullivan, who issued a sharp order directing Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche to either release previously withheld Jeffrey Epstein-related files or explain exactly why they should remain hidden. The deadline? July 2nd. The ruling stems from a lawsuit filed by investigative journalist Katie Fang, who argues the Justice Department violated the Epstein Files Transparency Act by failing to release all relevant records and by heavily redacting documents that have already been made public. According to the judge, simply pointing reporters toward Freedom of Information Act requests isn't enough. At the center of the dispute are FBI interview records involving a South Carolina woman whose allegations against Donald Trump date back decades. According to documents previously released by the Justice Department, the woman alleged Epstein introduced her to Trump in 1984 when she was approximately 13 years old. She claimed Trump sexually assaulted her during that encounter. Trump has consistently denied the allegation. Importantly, no criminal charges were ever filed against him regarding these claims, but the allegations themselves are deeply disturbing. According to summaries of FBI interviews conducted in 2019, after Epstein's federal arrest, the woman alleged Epstein brought her to what she described as a very tall building with enormous rooms. She claimed everyone else left the room before Trump allegedly unzipped his pants and forced her into a sexual act.
The administration must explain why the full files have not been released. It must explain why specific redactions remain, and it must explain why Congress was not given the justification the law requires. That alone is a major development. But what makes the story even more intense is the White House response.
At Bloomberg. Thanks, Caroline. Secretary Litnick today was testifying on the Hill, and he said that he had visited Epstein's Island in 2012 with his wife and children, and that's after he said that he had cut ties with Epstein. And Justice Department documents show that he was in contact with Epstein through 2018 over messages. So does the White House stand behind Secretary Litnick right now, or given what he has said today, has there been any shift in how the White House is viewing Secretary Litnick's performance?
No, Secretary Litnick remains a very important member of President Trump's team, and the president fully supports the secretary. I will just point out that there are a lot of wins in the news this week that people in this room have not asked about, because you continue to ask questions about the same subject, so let me point them out for you. Again, on Friday, the Dow shattered 50,000 for the first time ever. This week, the American Society of Plastic Surgeons came out in opposition to gender mutilation surgeries for children. They are the first major medical group to do so. A federal appeals court today, nobody asked about that, just upheld the Trump administration's policy of detaining illegal aliens, validating the strong measures that have driven illegal crossings to historic lows, and sent a crystal clear message that under President Trump, if you enter the country illegally, you will be detained and removed. The murder rate, again, not a single question about this, has plunged to a 125-year low as crime falls across the board, thanks to President Trump's crime crackdown. We also saw this week national median rents have fallen to a 4-year low following 6 consecutive monthly declines, and mortgage affordability has surged to a 4-year high. Home ownership is the core foundation principle of the American dream, and I will repeat that mortgage affordability this week surged to a 4-year high, but not a single mention of that in this briefing room today. And again, this came out last Friday, but for an unprecedented 9th straight month, there were 0 illegal border crossings at the southern border. So we're going to get back to business. The president is very busy today, and you will see him all tomorrow at the event in the East Room touting his administration's energy policy. Thank you.
Karen Leavitt previously dismissed the allegation involving Trump by arguing that Joe Biden's Department of Justice knew about it for years and did not prosecute him. In other words, the argument was basically this: if there had been anything real there, Biden's DOJ would have acted. But that is not proof. A lack of prosecution does not automatically mean an allegation is false. Prosecutors decline cases for many reasons: evidence standards, witness issue, jurisdictional problems, timing, politics, or simply because they believe they cannot win it in court. That does not mean the public should be denied access to records that the law says should be released. And that is the weakness in the White House argument. They are trying to turn "we was not charged" into "there is nothing to see." But those are not the same thing.
Judge is giving the Trump administration 1 week to release more of the Epstein files or explain why it's keeping them secret. The D.C. judge's ruling is in response to a lawsuit brought by an independent journalist claiming the Justice Department has not fully complied with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. That's the law passed by Congress last November requiring a broad public release of the records. The judge ordered the government to remove redactions from certain documents, including exposing the people who sent and received emails referring to a so-called torture video and alleged sexual activity with young women, including minors. The order also covers interview notes with a woman who made unverified claims she was sexually abused by President Trump when she was a minor. Again, the department has the option to explain why it's choosing not to release certain info. On top of that, the judge wants the Justice Department to produce a log identifying every redaction it has made to the published files, which is required by law. The agency has so far released more than 3 million pages of Epstein records.
The question is not just whether Trump was prosecuted. The question is whether the government is obeying the law. The question is why documents remain hidden. The question is why redactions were not properly explained. The question is Why, after all the promises of transparency, the public still does not have the full picture. And this is where the media comes in.
A Democratic congressman from California, Robert Garcia, he's the ranking member on the Oversight Committee. Congressman, what do you make of what the DOJ has released so far?
Well, let's just start by being very clear. The DOJ and the Trump administration completely missed the legal requirement to actually get all of the documents out to the American public. And so right now, they are defying the law. They are defying Congress. They have not met, which is with a very simple standard laid out in the law that was bipartisan. And so they are illegally right now trying to catch up to what Congress mandated for them to do. So it's unacceptable. It needs to be called out. Of course, we've been planning and looking at legal options to continue to push for that release, and that continues. And as far as what they have put out, I mean, it's laughable that this is an administration that claims somehow that they're being transparent when most of what they put out was either A, already public record. So much of the documents, could be as much as half of them, were already in the public record. And what the other pieces that they released were highly redacted. And in some cases, entire documents, not one word was actually left on there for the public to see. So this idea that somehow they are being honest with the public, what clearly is happening is a White House cover-up. They are now trying to cover up the truth. So it's incredibly important that Congress and the American public and the survivors who are really leading this effort stand strong and continue to push for the release of all of the Epstein files.
Some outlets have pushed for more answers, others have treated the issue cautiously, and critics argue that major newspapers and networks often avoid pressing too hard because they do not want to lose access to powerful officials. That is exactly why cases like this matter, because when politicians control the message, when agencies control the documents, and when the biggest media institutions hesitate to challenge them aggressively, the public is left in the dark. The Epstein files are not just another political scandal. They involve victims, they involve power, they involve people who had access, money, influence, and protection. And if the government is rejecting information without giving the explanation required by law, then this is no longer just about Epstein. It is about whether the American public is allowed to know the truth. It is about whether powerful people get one version of justice while everyone else gets another. It is about whether transparency laws actually matter or whether they only matter until the documents become politically inconvenient.
Now let's go over to NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles, who's following all this for us. Ryan, I know this is a ton to go through, but so far, what are the big top lines here? Like, what have we seen?
Well, it's a lot of photos, Agati, and a lot of photos of very famous men who we knew had interacted with Jeffrey Epstein in the past. These are the first time we've seen some of these images. There's a whole lot of pictures of Bill Clinton, who, of course, has repeatedly said that he had no interaction with Jeffrey Epstein in terms of his criminal activity. But we also saw pictures of the pop star Michael Jackson. There's a photo of the billionaire Richard Branson and also the rock star Mick Jagger. And then there are just hundreds of thousands of pages of court documents, of media clippings and different articles. But in its aggregate, there isn't all that much that is really revealing the kind of, explosive information that I think many of the survivors and the victims of the Epstein controversy were looking for tonight.
Yeah, speaking of, like, what have we not seen, either because we haven't gotten to it yet or because it's redacted here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot that just is not showing up. And there are pages and pages of this material that are completely blacked out. And oftentimes in government documents that are released to the public, you'll see significant swaths of a page redacted. in some cases, there are entire PDFs in which the entire page of the PDF, each page of that PDF is just a big black box. And so that's already raising questions from the members of Congress that demanded that this information be released. They want to know what is in those redactions, or at the very least, why the Department of Justice chose to redact that material. They've just provided very broad lines as to why they chose to redact certain things and not redact other things.
That is why this judge order is important, because the court is now forcing the administration to do what politicians often avoid: answer directly. Why are the files still not fully released? Why are key sections still blacked out? Why was Congress not properly briefed on the redaction? And if there is nothing to hide, why not release the documents now? That is the question hanging over this entire story. The White House can deny, Trump can deny, officials can say this is old news, political theater, or a baseless attack. But none of that answers the legal issue at the center of the case. The law demanded transparency. The public was promised transparency. The victims deserve transparency. And now a federal judge is demanding transparency.
So there's going to be a lot of questions from members of Congress as to how that decision process came to be, and whether or not some of that stuff can actually be made public in the spirit of the law.
And Ryan, these Clinton pictures, I mean, we see people's face blurred. We know that the DOJ had specific instructions only to redact victims or minors. We also know that there was talk about having the Clintons come testify in person about some of all this before Congress. Well, what is the latest on that?
So as it stands in terms of the congressional investigation, which is separate from this release of information from the Department of Justice, the House Oversight Committee did postpone the deposition that was supposed to take place this week. It's now scheduled to take place in early January. The Clintons have said that they do not believe that they are relevant witnesses in this investigation, that they knew nothing of Epstein's crimes, and that they should not be forced to answer these questions. Republicans on the House Oversight Committee disagree. They still believe that both Bill and Hillary Clinton should come in and be deposed, and that is scheduled for early January. Whether or not they show and run the risk of being in contempt of Congress is still an open question. But
that is why this moment feels different. This is no longer just a social media argument. This is no longer just another cable news debate. This is now in federal court with a deadline, a judge, and a demand for answers. By July 2nd, Todd Blanche must either explain why the government has not released the full Epstein files, or the administration can avoid that explanation by releasing the unredacted records. Either way, the pressure is rising, and for Trump, the timing could not be worse, because the more the government fights to keep these files hidden, the more obvious the question becomes. What exactly are they afraid the public will see?